Hi everyone, my name is Greg Mladicky. I'm going to be walking you through a quick merge of the Pushable actor now that it is available on the marketplace. I wanted to do this just because merging two blueprints, especially something like this, isn't necessarily too difficult, but it is a little tedious, and there are some things in there that's a little bit hidden. Things like blueprint interfaces and the input and everything like that. So I just kind of wanted to walk through it, show everyone kind of how it works. So if you bought it, you can go ahead and create a project. I'm just going to name this Push Merge, and I have another one, another project already created that's the Push Merge test. So it'll download for you, create the project, and then you should be able to open it up. So once we've opened up the new project, you'll see that everything is in this default scene. And you can press play and run around and test it all out. But we're just going to merge this folder over into our existing one. That's going to be through our migrate. So if we right click and we say migrate, you'll see that we have all the content currently in there able to migrate over. So hit OK. And we're going to find the project we want to move it over to. Mine is going to be called Push Merge Test. That's just the testing one. The one that's just push merge is the one we just created. Push merge test is just the default third-person template. We need to hit our content folder, make sure it's content, and hit OK. Once we do that, you can see content migration completed successfully. Now, I already have the project set up right here, so I'm going to jump over to it. And you can see the third-person template stuff is already here, but you also see this Pushable actor project, and that's just everything we migrated over, contained in its own folder. So we're all set. So the first thing we need to do is actually make sure that this currently works, everything in here that we moved over. There are a few things we do have to set up, one of which is the input for it. So if we go up to our settings, what we can do first is go to project settings and we can add that input. This is what you're going to press when you want to walk up and begin your pushing interaction. We're going to find that under our input on the left and under action mappings. So what we want to do is add that interact key in. If we hit the plus sign, we can say interact. And this is the default name that I gave it previously, so if you type it in the same way, interact, it should update everything and you won't have any problems with it. The key that we're going to use is the E key on the keyboard. Let's go down and find it. And I also have one set up for the gamepad, which is the bottom face button. And that's usually like the A key on the Xbox controller, or the X key on the PlayStation. So once that's good, we can open up our push character. This is under the Pushable actor project, the blueprint for our push character. We can go over a few things in here. The one thing I really want to make sure is just that it compiles correctly. Back in the event grass, this is where our input interact is sitting that we just updated. So if we compile it, save it, everything seems to be just right. Now, everything on the right-hand side, this red, this is the stuff that I've added to the character. This includes things like making sure we're selecting the pushable actor, the one that we're actually looking at, interacting with it, and adding movement to it and things like that. Everything on the blue is just the default character movement, looking around, touch input, jumping, things like that. So we really only need this stuff over here, as well as the functions you find in the left-hand side here. We're going to go ahead and just add in these variables as we need them. Unreal has a nice system for just adding them in, so we don't need to worry about them yet. But let's make sure it works. If I drag out and now I have two characters. This is my third-person character, the default one we're going to merge, and this one is my push character, the one that should have everything working. If I go to the auto possession, and let's just test it out real quick. I'm going to turn it off of this guy so that we can auto possess our push character. Yep. And everything seems great. Now that we've added that input, there's no issues with that event. Now that we know it's working, we need to merge the code from our push character over to our third person character. Now this will be whatever character you've been working on, and I'm going to open it up and throw this one on the left hand side and the push character on the right. Now by default we have pretty much everything in here that I have on the left hand side. The only thing that I've done in the push character is kind of taken over some of this movement code. So if we're in the middle of pushing a crate or a box or anything like that, that takes over the movement and uses it for something else. So I'm just going to delete that out so that when we copy this over, we're just going to replace it. Now, before we do anything else, I want to add in a few things. One is going to be the blueprint interface. The interface is used so that we can kind of have these events be called on any character at all. So any character that we reference from the push object, as long as they have these events, it will work just fine. We can just copy and paste that code in. The other thing we want to do after we get the blueprint interface in is to add in these functions and make sure that they have all of their inputs and outputs. That's because when we go and have these inputs coming in, if we put them in before we add these inputs in, then these lines will get cut and it's just a little bit more work. It's faster if we set it all up before we copy everything over. So let's do it. Third person character, we're going to go to the class settings and add in our interface. This is going to be the BPI, Blueprint Interface Push Actor. Once that's added in, we can compile and save. When we move these over, these events should contain the code. It won't get messed up in any way then. Next, we want to add in each of these functions we have under the push actor here. So let's go ahead and let's add in each one. And I'm just going to make sure that they're all spelled the same way. You can type them in, or you can go and click on each one and paste in just to make sure everything is correct. We'll copy and paste. And I'm just single clicking, and when you do that and you click again, it'll actually let you rename it very quickly. The other shortcut is to hit F2, which is just a nice way to make sure all these are correct. They're all named the same way. We can even do it to the first one that we just typed in. But like I said, we want to make sure the inputs and outputs are all there. So if we jump through each one, we can kind of see, okay, this doesn't have an output or input, but this one does, should update highlight. So this is a Boolean, and it's called should update. So if we find that should update highlight, when we select our node, we can add an output right here, and we can name it the same, should update. Compile and save. Let's find the next one. I think the only other one is going to be this one here. Get best highlight has an index input. So let's get best highlight, add a new input. This is going to be an integer, and we're going to name it index. Now everything else should have no inputs or outputs. Yep. So the only ones are this should highlight and get best highlight. Now, once we've done that, we're just going to start copying and pasting all the code from our functions first, just because it's an easy way to make sure we get everything done. We're also going to have to add in the variables as we do it. Something to note is that this current dots is a local variable. You can see it down here. And the problem is when we create it, you'll see that it kind of gets a little messed up and we have to replace them. So just make sure that you remember that these two we'll probably have to drag out and add a new variable in. That's at least for this version of the editor, 4.9. It may be fixed in 4.10 or in the preview for 11, but right now it kind of doesn't like that we've added it in through this. So I've copied and pasted from our update highlight push to the update highlight push. And I'm just going to move it around, get it into place. And we need to find this input and have it set. Now you see these variables are kind of transparent, they're all blank, even though they have the name and everything. What we need to do is right click and say create variable. Now we're going to do this for the push actors, but like I said before, the current dots, when we right click, we're going to make sure we do it for as a local. So this is going to be our local variable. But when I compile this in just a minute, you'll see that this doesn't like it. It wants to change it. So we're going to do the same thing for the push.threshold. It's going to be a create variable. Highlighted push, we're going to create variable. This current dots is the same as this one here, but it won't like it, unfortunately. That should be it for this one. So if we hit compile, we're going to see that this one here and this one here do not like it. So we just need to drag out current dots variable and get rid of these ones. Once we're done with that, we can go to the next. This add push UI. Again, we're going to copy, go to add push UI and paste. For the push UI, let's add in this variable. Compile, looks good. Now we're going to go to remove. And the nice thing is as we go forward and continue to add these variables in, the less we're going to have to do for each one. Now we do have this grab push actor. Let's create a variable for that. This one's already created for us from the add. If we go to the should update, we copy that and paste it in. Now the one thing that might occur here is, yes, we have an extra one here. We can delete that out and just use the one that was originally there. I don't believe it matters which one you delete, just as long as you only have one return node. Everything in here is already added in. We have these two variables already set. Let's go to the end push state. Looks like everything's there. Compile. Looks good. Let's go to the begin push state. Looks good. Something to note is you don't actually need these return nodes. I have them in there, but if you just delete them out, everything's fine as well. Just for those return nodes that they don't do anything if we hit a valid node or not. I just kind of like to have them in there every once in a while. Last one is get best highlight. Copy. Paste. And we're going to hook this up to the branch and then feed this index into our get here. Looks like everything in here is good. We have all these variables already set. We can compile and save. Now the last thing that we have under our functions is this can jump. That's something that we want to add in as well. So we need to go to our functions and we need to override a function. So we need to go to this can jump. And the jumping is just going to stop us if we are in the middle of pushing an object. So if you do want your character to still jump when he's pushing an object, you can leave this out. But I found it feels better if we take it out. Right, and all that happens in here is we just override that can jump. Depending if we have a grabbed push actor or not. If you have other code in here, like if you need to make sure he can double jump, or if you want to make sure he's on the ground or anything like that, if you're using that hold to jump, you might need to do that here as well. Now we should be all set. The only thing we have to do is copy and paste the event graph code. So we can do that. I'm just going to highlight everything, copy it. We're going to paste it in here. And we're going to make sure that everything gets named correctly. Now, under our tick event, we need to add in a variable for our delta time. So let's go ahead and say create variable delta time. And we can go through this. Now, something that happens is any of these event graphs that get collapsed have a 2 behind them because they're a copied version of it, but since we are not in the same blueprint, we can just get rid of that and rename it to the original. Something to note is make sure that we have this from BPI. We need to make sure these events here and here are all from our blueprint interface. And lastly, we have this event on walking off edge. That's a overridden function that we have. You can see now instead of 30 it's going to be 29 overridden. It might be different depending on what you have overwritten in your character. Same thing with this end push state. We can rename this to get rid of the 2 behind it. Now here's the events that we had added in for the movement. The only thing that's different is we just check if we are pushing an actor or not. Otherwise we do the normal act movement. If you have some sort of movement input function or anything like that, all you need to do is just get this stuff here and add it to yours so that when we're pushing, we don't do whatever other code you do for pushing or for moving normally. Everything else looks good. All these are added in. We can compile and save. You'll note that all of these function calls that we do on the event graph or in any of these collapse graphs are all set. They don't have any missing inputs, outputs, anything like that. So everything should be good to go. One thing I like to do but isn't necessary, take all of these functions and variables and put them into a category, which I'm going to call push. You can call it whatever you'd like, but it's nice to make sure these all stay in one place. And same thing with these. And we can leave the delta time out, as it can be used for anything. Now, our push actors, by default, this is just what we have in our list. We don't need to do anything for that. Same thing with our highlighted or the UI. This all gets created. The grabbed one is the one we're currently pushing. The push dot threshold, though, by default, I had it set up as around 0.5. You could go even higher to like 0.75. You can play around with it, but the idea is that the higher you go to 1, from -1 to 1, is that dot product. If you're directly looking at it completely equal, it'll be 1. So you don't want to make it 1 just because then the player would have to be exact in where they're looking for them to interact with that object. You want to leave it a little bit wider, so you kind of have this bigger cone of interaction. But feel free to play with that number. Once we're all done, we can save it. One thing to note is that this character here, this skeleton for this mesh, is not the same as our pushing character. Because we've merged it over and because the project that we had previously had its own skeleton, its own mesh, this character won't have any pushing animations. So let's just try it out and make sure everything works though. We can go ahead and we can delete our previous guy. Make sure that this third person character is the one who's auto-possessed. Everything looks good. And when I play, I can go up, I can grab it, and I can move it. But, just like I had said, we have no animations. That's because we need to add those animation blueprint to this character. If I hit Control E, I can open up the editor. And something that you might do right away is say, okay, we can just drop in our push animation blueprint. But if I do that, unfortunately, it doesn't work for us. Here it is. And it's named ABP animation blueprint push character. When I do it, you can see that my character snaps to that kind of A pose, that T pose, and it doesn't move. That's not necessarily because it doesn't work with this character. It uses the same skeleton, and everything is the same. I just opened up the animation blueprint. You can find that under the animations folder. But what you'll see here is that we are casting to a character, so this should work for the character and everything like that. What is happening is that we actually have a different skeleton since we moved it in. So if we go to this folder, Pushable Actor, we have our character and we have our mesh and our skeleton. And what this one is referencing is the one under our third person character, which I believe is here. It's under mannequin. So under mannequin they have the animations and the character mesh. Now there's a couple ways to solve this problem. The easiest for anyone who just wants to use these push animations, you don't have any extras or anything like that, is just to use the new mesh that we've imported and to get rid of the previous one. So under mesh, all we have to do is go up to our SK mannequin here, and you'll see that this one, if you hover over it, will tell you it's under the game mannequin character mesh, and the one below it is under the game pushable actor character mesh. They're the exact same thing, they just are two different files. So we can go ahead and hit it, and everything works. So now when I go to push, everything's good. That wraps up the short version, so if that's all you're looking for, you're all set. This now is all integrated into our character. The only thing on the left-hand side is the extra code that either you will have in there or it's the default third-person character stuff. Again, the only thing we really need to be worried about is if you do anything special for your movement. In here you'll do that stuff. Everything else you can just integrate right into our event tick. You can just add this function right behind it if you have anything else in there, and you're all set. If you do have something for the event walk off edge, you just add this past it. That's just to make sure if the character is falling off an edge that they release the crate or the box. So, back in our viewport, I'm going to jump to our mesh again, and let's say that we do want to use our previous character skeleton. Now, this is just a skeletal mesh that's being matched to a different skeleton. And we just need to either get rid of the skeleton that we don't want to use or find just a nice way to merge them. So under our third person character, we have these animations that are also existent in our animations here. So the third person walk, run, the blend space forward, everything like that, along with all the push animations as well. If we go down to our character, we see that we have a copy of the materials, the mesh and the skeleton, the textures, everything like that. But because we have it already in our mannequin here, including the mesh, textures, everything like that, we really only need one or the other, so we can just delete one and tell it to use the other. Let's say you have some custom animations and things that you have set up on this character and you want to just transfer mine over. What you can do is make sure to save everything. In fact, you could back up a copy of this just to make sure, but we're just going to delete this entire thing. So we're going to delete this entire folder for our character. Say delete. It's going to tell us that there's a bunch of things that are referencing it. That's fine for us right now. Let's just go ahead and delete. And we're just going to make sure our animations all get assigned to the correct skeleton. So I can say yes, and we're going to choose the one skeleton that we have there, the mannequin skeleton. And it'll say it is successfully retargeted and things like that, and everything else should retarget with it because it's similar. Now these bottom ones here, the third person walk all the way up to this, we don't necessarily need. We can delete them, but just note that when we do that, our animation graph might need to be updated as well. So we're referencing this third person idle run in the blueprint animation here. So if you want to use this one still, you would have to update it as you do that. We can save everything, and we're going to jump back into this character. Let's see what we can do. If we want to just use instead of the third person character, we can use the push character, and this will now allow for pushing again. For those who are sticking around for the blueprint animation graph, I'll just go through it really quickly. When integrating, you're going to do the exact same thing that I did for the previous one. You're going to first go up to the class settings. We also are using the blueprint interface, the push actor, inside of the blueprint animation editor. You're going to add that in. You'll see under the functions I have a couple here. You're going to add in these three, and these two, check falling and set speed. These are the ones that are kind of already in the default animation graph. This is just to see if the character's in the air. And they also have getting the calculate direction. The one thing that I'm doing here though is making sure not to update this if we're pushing. So if we are in the middle of a push, we're not going to be updating. We're going to be updating that through the blueprint interface from the object itself. So once you have that done, you'll copy and paste all the functions and then all of this. There are quite a few variables. These are for the IK, right hand, left hand, all things like that. Pushing, and if we're using one of the alternative idles. These integers just count how long the player's been sitting in the idles, how often it's played, and then kind of mix it up. Speed and direction are just variables that have been used for the basic character movement. Same thing is in air, used for the jumping and falling. If I jump into the animation graph itself, it's just the default state machine, and you can see this is just like the default third-person character with the jump, start, loop, and end. The part that we've added on is this pushing. This pushing uses just a boolean to see if you're in the middle of pushing, or jumps to see if you're falling, and we go into the falling state. You're never going to be jumping if you are still in the middle of pushing, so we don't need to worry about if you're still pushing or not at that point. Inside here we have the IK set up to move the hands to try and conform best they can to any kind of object. For the most part they work, but I'm going to go back through and try and fix up a little bit more of it soon, so look for that update. And in here we just are playing a blend space with the idles as like just a way to break them up. And I'm just using the integers to drive that. So once we've added in all the functions, you can set it up similar to the way I have it here. Again, you don't necessarily need to put these two into functions, but I just like to paste all this. All these events will be blueprint interface events, and these ones are going to be from the animation notifies. That's just to tell you that the basic idle is played so often, and so forth. After that's all done, everything should be great. You should be able to move your push actor assets into an existing project and use them. So that about wraps it up. Feel free to email me, comment below, or add a comment on the actor in the marketplace as well. I'll try and get back to everyone, answer questions as quickly as I can. Otherwise, thanks for watching.